Hello everybody and welcome to another edition of the BrainFood Show. This one featuring a very special guest, 15-year veteran author of Today I Found Out, Karl Smallwood, perhaps better publicly known for his Fact Fiend and Wiki Weekends channels. But behind the scenes, a huge reason why both Top 10s and Today I Found Out ever became a thing here on YouTube, which for those who don't know were Simon's first two channels, teaming up with me here and then over on Top 10s, the late great Shell Harris. But before all that, when Today I Found Out was just a lowly website in the halcyon days where blogs ruled the internet, Karl was there, one of my first ever hires way back in 2012 when todayifoundout.com was only a little over 2 years old, making Karl the OG author from before there was a basement to chain them in properly. On that note, here on Today I Found Out, Karl's the author of about 500 scripts, which is about 1 in 5 videos we have here. Also, fun fact, several of his scripts were the ones that after some 550 videos we published here on YouTube, with quite literally almost no views to show for it, finally took off and the channel never looked back. Karl's most recent contributions here include Legendary Legend, The Heartwarming Life of the Crocodile Hunter, How the Hell Does Superman Cut His Hair and Shave, and how one of the most successful sci-fi films of all time was continually derailed by tea. Going back to today's BrainFood Show episode, in the appetizer section, Karl and I will be looking over that time the British attempted to replace parachutes with rockets and the hilarity that ensued. Moving on to the main course, we'll be diving into the United States' attempt to make mail delivery by rocket totally a thing. And in the dessert, we'll be looking at where one of the highest compliments anyone at NASA can be given, Steely-eyed Missile Man, came from, as well as looking at a couple stories of the most famous instances of someone being called this. And finally, we'll be covering the rather humorous shepherd's prayer that would become the mantra of all astronauts after 1961, and something all of us should probably be uttering before doing anything important. Before we get started though, just wanted to quickly mention, if you're currently watching this on Today I Found Out, you can also subscribe to the BrainFood Show on whatever podcasting platform you like, links below, and on the podcast feed you'll also find 75 episodes featuring Simon and I, about half of which we've never posted on Today I Found Out. So go check it out below. Over 1,300 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts alone cannot be wrong, except for Sir Nevin and his 1-star, it's okay, not great. But you know what Sir Nevin didn't say? That it was bad. So I really think that should be a 3-star, good Sir Knight. But without further ado, let's dive into today's episode, beginning with replacing parachutes with rockets, because what could go wrong? Let's jump into the appetizer today, which is looking at that time the British Navy decided they were going to try to replace parachutes with rockets. So there were countless innovations that came out of World War II, from radar-guided missiles and nuclear weapons. One of the less glamorous but nonetheless important developments of the war was the use of parachutes to rapidly deliver troops and equipment behind enemy lines, a technique that proved instrumental in dozens of operations, from German invasion of the Low Countries in 1940 to the Allied D-Day landings in 1944. But the parachutes at the time had their limitations because, unlike more modern parachutes, they could not be steered. You literally just jumped out, pulled the parachute, and floated wherever it took you. And you were obviously very prone to drifting off target and enemy fire. Can you imagine just floating down? There's nothing you can do, and people just shooting at you. You're just hoping you don't get hit or your parachute doesn't get hit. That would be, I don't know, the whole thing of just jumping out of the plane in the first place into enemy territory and then just people taking pot shots at you.
It's genuinely terrifying to think about, because you see it in war movies all the time, of the heroic paratroopers leaping out of the plane. The thing that most people don't realise, obviously movies don't want to show it like this, is it's pitch black a lot of the time. No one can see anything, and you're being shot at the entire time. Yeah,
you're just probably seeing tracer bullets, all around you, and yeah. And the fact that the parachute technology was so new at the time anyway, so even just the whole idea of jumping out of a plane and just, hopefully my parachute opens and then, don't get shot on the way down. Or you drift off deep into enemy territory and then you're just all alone in
a tree.
Territory.
In a tree.
Yeah.
Land in a tree, or a farm, or land on top of someone's roof. I remember I wrote scripts ages ago about how do you survive falling out of a plane if you haven't got a parachute? Mm-hmm. And there was some World War II stories that served as evidence for it is possible to survive. There's some guy who landed on a train station in Paris and went through the glass roof and somehow landing on glass was enough to slow down his descent enough to not kill him.
Yeah, or you also mentioned one where the guy who fell into snow, and then the Germans, they captured him, but they were so impressed by the feat because he wasn't really even injured, that they gave him a little certificate commemorating and let him go at a certain point. Yeah, that was great. I recorded that one too for the Higher Learning channel. I don't know if you've seen that, where I fly around the airplane, and when I was recording that, what was funny is some of the worst turbulence I've ever experienced in my plane back then, and it was just bouncing around. You'll see me like laughing a bunch because it doesn't really come through because the stabilizer on the camera really takes it, but the plane is just bouncing all over, and it was a fitting script for that sort of thing. But in any event, in an attempt to solve this problem and make airborne delivery faster and more accurate, in 1944, the British Admiralty conducted a series of experiments to explore the use of rockets to slow the descent of falling payloads, eliminating the need for parachutes altogether.
I don't get this, right? Because surely you need to test this. And I don't understand how you'd ever test something like this, because surely any test pilot willing to strap a rocket to their back and jump out of a plane, the weight of their balls would cause them to immediately plummet to the ground. This is the thing that gets me. Like, they have to test these things, and someone had to test a parachute to make sure it worked, right? I have to think, is it the famous story of the guy who tried to make the parachute suit and he jumped off of like halfway up the Eiffel Tower and just fell and died, and it's like one of the most famous killed by their own invention stories. And it's like, that guy's a hero if you think about it, because who else are we going to get to try that?
And you can
into this.
You can send, as they do with this, you can send other payloads down, but you're not quite getting the same weight distribution and just the whole thing. And they had a lot of fun for this. But it is just they had rockets facing downwards and no parachute, and it seems pretty simple a concept, but the problem is, of course, the timing, because if the rocket is it triggers too late, you're just going to plow into the ground. Triggers too early, you're just going to hover and then down, or maybe you did it too powerful and then you're going to shoot back up in the air and then you come back down.
So it's not start falling all over again, right?
Yeah. It has to be perfect. If it's even off, it doesn't take much, obviously, for a human. If you're 20 feet off the ground instead of 0, or the other way, you're dead or you're severely injured. So you have to be perfect on this, pretty much. So to resolve the timing aspect of this, the wizards at the Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development, or DMWD, how they decided this, they hung a plumb bob at an appropriate distance below the payload, so it was a weighted thing, and as soon as that thing would touch the ground, the rockets would fire. So they would calculate what distance it needed to be for the power of rockets, and then it would fire. Initial trials were conducted using concrete blocks fitted with the rockets and dropped from a crane. But it was, you imagine like the people, if they had the test pilots or test people watching. So the first one, what they fitted with too few rockets, so it simply buried itself in the ground. But then not only did it bury itself in the ground, because there's these rockets, they exploded like right after. So witnessing this impressive spectacle of the crashing into the ground and then exploding rockets, one of the observers, Captain G.O.C. Davies, exclaimed, "Look at it! It's Elijah in reverse," and referring to the biblical prophet ascending to heaven in a chariot of fire. And this would help inspire the name for the project, which was Hagile. It's just Elijah in reverse. Okay. I think it's pronounced Hagile or whatever. So it became
that's a bad idea, right? Naming things after something
going to heaven.
Is it? Yeah. It feels like you're really tempting fate when you name something after something biblical.
Yeah.
I feel like every time I've ever heard a story about someone naming something after something from the Bible, it's probably tempting fate, right? I'm not like that superstitious a person, but that just really does feel like you're tempting. Like, I imagine God would have a sense of humor with how long they've been about.
Yeah. So the second drop, they ended up just like the first, while the third, the engineers fitted the block with too many rockets, causing it to launch itself back up into the air and then crash back to the ground. This was a very difficult problem. With these, the team decided to conduct all further experiments over the sea, with the hope that when it hit the water, they could at least, even if it hit too hard, they could at least recover the stuff, or if it shot back up and they could recover.
That was done, right?
Yeah, the test beds and analyze.
I'm always seeing a problem here. Surely this will cost so much more money, right? Because the thing about a parachute is it's material. I know there's a lot more goes into them now, but it's just a couple dozen feet of material shoved into a knapsack with like, some science gone into it to make it work at the right moment. Rockets are very expensive. Like, how much more efficiency are you getting to justify what must have been like a massive increase in cost and risk?
And again, just imagine the human factor. If you're a human being, jumping out of a plane with a parachute is going to be scary enough, especially back then. But to do it with just, you have a rocket. You're strapped to a rocket and you hope it just works. That's terrifying because you're coming down so fast. And these rockets, because of how powerful they are, they're not firing until you're super close to the ground. And so you're just like, woo, and then, there's going to be a split second between whether the rocket fires or not. And it's going to be so fast that if it doesn't fire, you're not even going to realize. You're just dead. And if it does fire, you're just hoping it works out.
It's that great quote about like bomb disposal, right? Where I think it was like someone from Vice or maybe BuzzFeed interviewed like a bomb disposal expert, and that's not, how do you stop yourself being stressed when you are like, tinkering with a bomb? It's like, well, either I get it right or it's very quickly and very suddenly no longer my problem, because like I'm like spread over a wide area. And I guess that's, you just have to look at it that way, right? Of either it works or I'm instantly just a pile on the ground.
And it seems like also, do you remember, I don't know who did this one way back in the day, I think something Pike, there was a British guy who they kept around just because of his zany ideas.
George Pike.
And he did one of them. I mean, beyond the more famous was the like iceberg
Pike
aircraft carrier. Yeah, which was pretty cool and probably actually would have worked well. But he did one where he suggested, because transporting troops and supplies and stuff was an issue from ships and stuff to wherever they were. So he suggested laying pipes full of water where you would put the person in the pipe and give them some oxygen. So it's just a sealed pipe. You can't get out. And they'll shoot you through it to the other end at really high velocity.
Okay, so that's the salmon cannon, essentially, right? You must have seen the salmon cannon, which is how they like transport salmon when they in fish farms where they breed salmon. If you just get basically a hose and it just sucks up all the salmon and then just fires them into their new location with people, or like the tubes from Futurama.
Yeah, I do not watch Futurama.
Well, it's essentially like pneumatic tubes that you use to send mail, but you put people in instead.
Yeah.
It's
well, at least if it was a tube where if you were a tube in like a thing where you could sit or something, but just immersed in water in an enclosed thing that there is no possibility of getting out except for on the other end, and you have your oxygen supply. That's it. That would be
probably the single most terrifying thing.
Soldiers volunteering.
Yeah. So I always, when you see like military training, they always have that thing where they crawl through this pipe that's partially underwater with all your gear on, and like some people just have panic attacks and can't do it. I'm scared of the water, so that would be like my nightmare.
Yeah, so I would never get in that tube either. That would not be
double check. I think the guy's Jeffrey Pike as well. I don't know why I said George. George sounds like a more British name.
Yeah, that guy was cool though, because he did one where he actually escaped he got captured and he escaped a German camp using his knowledge of the sun, where it would be at a certain point to reflect, like his zany ideas. It would reflect off this window at a certain time, which would blind the guards who were watching that building. And then he timed it, and then he timed his escape there, and he actually was successful in his escape for this zany way.
See, I've always thought Prison Break was based on reality, because that literally happens in season 2 of Prison Break, or season 3, really? When they've got to escape from prison again. Yeah, he just times the escape so that the guard tower is being blinded by the reflection of a window.
Oh, nice! That's exactly what he did in real life. So,
well, there we go. I guess there's some truth to it, because I always thought Prison Break's so stupid. And now it's nice to know there's one element of Prison Break that's not as stupid as I thought it was. Because that guy. Yeah. There's still ideas that sometimes work, right?
Yeah, presumably someone must have saw that story, because you can't think they thought of that on their own. But in any event, going back to these drops. So when they're going over the water, they couldn't do it in a crane drop, so they just did it from a bomber, which would be kind of what it would be in real life anyway. It was, let's see, what kind of bomber? Lancaster heavy bomber. Mm-hmm. And so unfortunately, the first few drops landed too far away from the pier, so they couldn't observe it closely enough and recover the stuff. So they told the pilot, drop it closer to the pier, with hilarity ensuing, as they describe.
As Gilles came screaming through the air, the watchers on the pier gazed open-mouthed. Then suddenly, realising it was going to score a direct hit, everyone started running for dear life down the long plank roadway. The concrete bomb, in quotation marks, landed squarely on the roof of the DMWD's engineering shop. It sheared through a massive steel joist and then demolished the covered way leading to the steamer jetty. Happily, there were no casualties, though the WREN, the WRNS, the Women's Royal Naval Service, cooks preparing lunch a few feet from the wrecked shelter, thought the end of the world had come.
This was not the only time they had something like this happen with rockets. There was another project, and I can't remember the name of it now, but there was a wheel that they put rockets on.
Yes,
and so
I was just going to say it's because I, years and years and years ago, wrote an article on like weird World War II weaponry. As I believe every writer at some point has written an article about weird World War II weapons, and that is Tangential.
Mm-hmm.
It's an experiment. I have it here. It's an experimental weapon designed by the British to breach the formidable Atlantic Wall. So that's essentially like the thing the Nazis had up slowly getting past. And it was just a wheel covered in rockets. And the idea was just the wheel will roll real fast and just smash through the wall and then beeline its way towards Hitler, unless it hits something else on the way. And the first time they tried it, because they just tried it on a British beach, it flew and nearly hit one of the generals in charge.
Yeah, it was great. I can't remember the description of that is really funny too, where it's careening at them and everyone is running out of the way.
There is a video, yes.
Rocket
and it's
powered
like
wheel.
old like black and white footage, and it nearly kills like the people using it. And if a weapon is as dangerous to the people using it as it is to the people using it against, that's probably not a good weapon.
So, following this, the Gilles team finally began to make some progress when they increased the number of rockets from 4 to 8. In this configuration, the test blocks came to a complete stop just a few feet above the water before plopping in and sinking slowly beneath the surface. From here, they attempted to get the Royal Navy to provide them with a number of jeeps so they could test dropping jeeps, and the Royal Navy said, no, we're not going to waste jeeps on this. You're just going to destroy them. But the U.S. Navy was like, yes, let's do it. Let's do it.
Why not?
So they gave the British a bunch of jeeps to drop, and this did not go well. The first jeep just smashed spectacularly into the ground at terminal velocity when the rockets did not fire because something with the fuses. I can't remember, the cold or something, which the weather conditions can affect the fuses. It's not inspiring a lot of confidence. So 2 weeks of tinkering later, the team was ready to try again. This time, the rockets fired right on cue, and the jeep was not destroyed in this way, but when the smoke cleared, it was upside down.
Okay.
So
that's bad, but that's better than it being in pieces. And I don't know why this reminds me of just a prank call a friend of mine did years and years and years ago, where he had one of those like I don't know, you call them ATVs, right? Quad bikes.
Yeah.
And he just called up the number on the back because we'd had a drink, and he just called up the customer service like, yeah, I need some help. It's like, okay, what's wrong? It's like, it's upside down. I don't know what to do. It's just upside down. And just he played it completely straight. And the person with the phone's like, what do you mean it's upside down? It's like, yeah, it's stuck upside down. Have you got any advice for how to stop it being upside down? If we tried tipping it back over, it's like, well, how would I do that? It's upside down. And it was like half an hour that he managed to keep this person on the phone trying to give advice on how to stop something being upside down. That's all I can think of, just a bunch of like boffins in lab coats and like clipboards looking at it going, okay, so how do we stop it being upside down? Just, they can't figure it out.
It'd make a great Monty Python sketch. They could make that work. But you can see the problem is the weight and balance. First, you got to get it right. Otherwise, it's just going to flip because, the rockets, if they're equal power, one of them is going to be more powerful. But then the other problem from this is you also have to get the rockets to fire exactly. Every rocket has to fire within a split second, just exactly right on time, or it's going to, be all weird. And this is the exact problem they had. And it was one of the they did a number of tests after this, and they kept having this problem of the things just flipping over. But they did make significant progress and came pretty close to getting it perfected. But the end finally came on June 6, 1944, the day of the D-Day landings. On this day, an electrician accidentally triggered the rockets on a test rig while the engineering team was gathered around it, resulting in the whole thing exploding and blinding one guy. Louis Kamansky was blinded for a while after. And yeah, this caused a pause on the whole thing. And then, of course, because the war was wrapping up and the need for such a thing was not as pressing, so the whole project got canceled. But
at this point,
was a failure.
Right, I'm just thinking, just leak this and hope the Nazis build it. That's what I'd do, right?
Yeah.
And like they think they've got this figured out, and then you just see them like pinwheeling through the air.
Well, when the Nazis got desperate too, at the end they started pumping out, like they had that one they had a jet plane, I think it was made of wood too, that was designed specifically for teenagers because they didn't have any real pilots, and they would literally not give these these kids almost any training before, just like, here's a jet that's, cobbled together as quickly as we can, and I can't remember the speeds. It was crazy fast. Now go fight, and this was just a thing. And then they had another one
thing, the rammer, where it had no guns. And they said, we'll just crash into the other ships. And it's like, what?
They had another one where the fuel was something with the fuel would literally melt the pilots if it got free or whatever, and that was a problem. It was a really fast one. I don't think that jet, we had a really good video on it, lasted very long because of its propensity to, explode and things like that and melt the pilots alive. But yeah, so while all this was a failure for the British, the Soviets would take up the idea, and for example, they used it in a few places, but for example, ever since the first manned spaceflight in 1961, the Soviet Union and later the Russian Federation have opted to recover their space capsules on land rather than at sea, like the American space program. So there's several reasons. First, because they didn't have the Navy like the U.S. to just go wherever. They didn't have the naval power to make that happen safely necessarily, and they didn't want their people captured or whatever by a potential enemy, or just otherwise, floating around in the ocean and dying. So the second one, having it land in Russia itself, was, again, Russia's a huge place. They could, land. It's a big target, so they didn't have to worry too much about that, and make sure no enemies recovered any of their equipment or their astronauts, their cosmonauts. So
I do know for a while, cosmonauts, in the little capsule they had a number of things that American astronauts didn't have, and one of them was just a gun. And you might think, what do you need a gun for in space? It's not for space. It's when they landed and were waiting for rescue in case they got attacked by bears.
Yeah, and that happened. There was one of them. There was a famous one where I think it was the first, if I remember correctly, it was the first time a human did a spacewalk outside of the ship. And then, of course, he almost got stuck out there because his suit inflated and then the airlock wouldn't close.
Terrifying, right?
Yeah, eventually he figured that out and got back. But then I believe it was that one on the way down. They had a number of issues, and they ended up just way off in Siberia or something in the middle of nowhere. And there was wolves and bears and things, and
have a gun.
Came in handy. So
just the space gun. It's like Yuri Gagarin as well. I love the story he told of when he landed, he just got out of his capsule and started walking because he didn't really know what else to do, and just arrived on some lady's farm. And according to him, she asked him did you come from space? As a matter of fact, I did. It's you get one chance to make a joke like that, right? Literally, there's one chance in all of human history to have made that joke, and Yuri Gagarin purportedly made it. And it's what a hero.
It's a little bit like the scene on the Maverick, Top Gun Maverick, or in real life, there was that guy who he had to eject at I think it was 50,000 feet or something like that, and it was a bit over the top of a giant thunderstorm, and his parachute automatically deployed about whatever distance down. But the problem was the updrafts in the thunderstorm in the cloud would push him way back up to where he would pass out from lack of oxygen, and then he'd go back down. And he was in there I think for about an hour or so, just up and down, up and down, up and down, and just tossed about, and lightning and thunder all around him the whole time. And he said that it was also because of the lack of oxygen and just the sheer volume of water in the air and things around him, it was hard. It felt like he was being waterboarded during parts of it. Eventually, he came out of it and he was just off some random place, and he hitchhiked to a place and finally got back to base and everything. But he survived. He was good.
I just love how nonchalant. Yeah, it's like Yuri Gagarin. There's he had a scar on his face, and people always ask, "Oh, did you get that in a war, in a battle?" It's no, it's he was cheating on his wife, and he jumped out of a second-story window to avoid arguing with his wife, and he just didn't realise he was on a second story and just fell arse over tit. And it's he could have died falling out of a second-story window, which would have been a wild end for the first cosmonaut, right? If he just fell out of a window and died.
Yeah, his real end, we have a video on. It's really long of what sort of happened, because there's lots of conspiracies around it but it does seem like he just sort of crashed his plane and died. So it doesn't seem like there was, if I remember the conclusion of that one.
It just feels unsatisfying though, right? Of just, you'd think it's is it that lady who went over Niagara Falls in a barrel, slits on an orange peel and died a few years later, right?
Yeah.
That famous one. Yeah. It feels so unsatisfying to hear.
So going back to the how they did with these capsules, is the problem with them, if they're going to land on land, is they would be going too quickly. They couldn't put a big enough parachute because they were very cramped. They didn't, so they could, it would slow down considerably, but it was still going to hit the ground too fast. So now the first one, the Vostok capsule flown by Gagarin, actually solved the problem by just having him eject. He jumped out. But then they go to the they upgraded the system in future ones by having rockets, so they still have the parachute. But when it gets close to the ground, and it's actually shockingly close to the ground. What was it? Between 1.1 and 0.8 meters from the ground. At that point, they were going about 22 miles per hour with the parachutes, and so it would just cushion them. It would slow them rapidly to it was almost like a little cushion thing, where they were down to about 5 miles per hour, or what is that? And I didn't write it down. It's 2.5 meters per second. But whatever that is in kilometers per hour. But because it is possible that the rockets would fail, they also made their seating things very in such a way cushioned and stuff that they should be able to still survive even if the rockets don't fire. The parachute would be enough. It would just be really uncomfortable. And the Soviets also developed a separate system. This one was almost exactly like the Gilles with their BMD-1 lightweight armored fighting vehicle. So it weighed only 7.5 tons, so they could carry it around on any of their transport aircraft and just drop it wherever. And it did have a parachute, but it was lowering at a bone-crunching 15 to 20 meters per second, which that one's 65 kilometers per hour or 40 miles per hour. So originally, this was fine for the vehicle itself, could withstand it. So, but the people inside would not have a good time. So they would drop the crew separately. From this, it would come down, but then, of course, because of the whole drifting issue, they could be really far away, and they have to go find it and stuff. Yeah, so it was a problem. So they decided to put some rockets on it, similar to what they did in the space, to slow it right before, and they could get it down to about 7 meters per second, or about 15 miles per hour. And at that speed, it was fine. They could put a couple of the crew. Most of the crew would still jump separately, but they could have a couple people inside at least, so they're there, and then they all kind of rendezvous. So, moving on from there to the main course today is Rocket Mail, which is one you wrote.
I did write this one, years ago. Many, many, many years ago.
It was a good one. So today, for under $1, you can get the United States Postal Service to pick up and deliver a letter to anywhere in the continental U.S. in under a week. And if you want to bump it up to the price of a Starbucks coffee or so, you can get it there within a day or two. But it hasn't always been that way, and there's a reason they call it snail mail. To get around the problem, for a brief time in the 1950s, the United States Postal Service dared to dream big with rocket ships.
Yes.
So on June 8th, 1959, the then-named U.S. Post Office Department, with the help of the U.S. Navy, launched a rocket laden with what they officially dubbed missile mail.
Yes, okay, so I'm a big fan of missile mail. I've written many articles about many things, and something that has struck me over the years is how woefully uncreative a lot of people making these big important decisions are. Like, they just call them missile mail. Like, for example, I brought up that script I wrote years ago about all the crazy weapons from World War II, like bat bombs. They were just called bat bombs.
Branding problem.
It is. Like, you need to give it something scary sounding, right? Like Oppenheimer. Even though he said the quote in his head, when he's like, I am become death, destroyer of worlds, call it that. The Roosevelt quote of speak softly and carry a big stick. No, speak loudly and carry a big stick. Tell people you've invented just the population melter.
Wasn't there in the early days of the internet, a rocket mail email? I feel like that was a thing that...
When I was Googling the script earlier to find it, he did come up with Yahoo rocket mail, which I guess, if you want to, suggest the feeling of speed, it's a handy thing to evoke, right?
No. But surprisingly, the U.S. was not the first to try sending projectile transmitted messages. So most people probably know that at one point people used to use arrows for this to get stuff across, over castle walls and across rivers and stuff like that. But in slightly more modern times, author Heinrich von Kleist suggested in an 1810 article titled Useful Inventions that shooting artillery shells loaded with letters would be a great way to rapidly send important mail throughout Germany via establishing a relay network of this type of artillery. And that totally would have worked and probably been even better than rocket mail for accuracy and things.
Probably, yeah. Do you ever see how they used to collect mail back in the days, like rail? Because obviously if the train coming to a complete stop to collect mail would be completely stupid. It wastes so much time. They just have a guy with a hook, and he just catch the mail bag as they went past with a hook. And if you missed, it's like, well, I guess you got to wait for the next one. And they use that for ages.
We'll get to a story of an island who did something similar, but with tin cans. But about to get to that. So that idea, that one did not catch on, but others later more or less had the same idea, and they had some good success. For example, in the 19th century, and this is the one, in Tonga, residents of the island of Niafo'o decided to try using Congreve rockets to send and receive mail. And these Congreve rockets are the ones in the Star Spangled Banner. I don't know if you've heard where they the rockets red glare, which is a sort of weird thing. I as a kid, I never really thought about that. Like, rockets, of course, But you're thinking like, actually, like the late 18th century, they had rockets. Like that's kind of, I don't know. But yeah, these Congreve rockets were what they used. So the island, the lack of beaches and harbor, as well as the presence of the second deepest oceanic trench in the world, the Tonga Trench, right next to it, making it impossible to anchor, meant getting mail from the ship to land was something not regularly done, despite the fact that ships were constantly going by.
That must be annoying.
So their solution...
Right? They're just watching the ship go by. It's like, can we have any news? Sorry. No.
So what they did to get around it is ships just started dropping cans containing mail and things like that into the water, and then they would blast their horn, and then they would have swimmers would just go out and grab the stuff before the current did. And likewise, to send mail off, the swimmers would go out, drop off the little canisters, and the ships would pick it up as they passed without stopping. It's a
good way of doing it, right? Like the example with trains of it's too expensive to have the train stop, but we can go past you and just grab it as we go past. And you better hope that
and it's the same with the ships. Same as ships didn't want to stop, so this is what they did. And that actually earned the island the name of Tin Can Island, which was, it's too bad they didn't continue with go with the Congreve rockets, because it could have been Rocket Island or something like that.
Rocket Island would have been great. So I've got a friend who's like got the last name Rocket, and he doesn't have Rocket as a nickname. Yeah. Like his nickname is Bean because he has a head shaped like a bean, and he's got the last name Rocket. And it's like, I feel so bad for that friend because like, you got the coolest last name I've ever heard, and your nickname is Bean because you got a head shaped like a baked bean.
That's definitely a downgrade. So the primary problem with the using the Congreve rockets was they were inherently inaccurate and unreliable. This is notably illustrated by the British officer Alexander Cavier Messier when discussing the medium-range variety during the Waterloo campaign in 1815, where he states.
So I'll give this quote here, and I love as well, like, beautiful British name there, Cavalier Messier. It's like, just the Commonwealth is a large place. The order to fire is given. Port fire applied. The fidgety missile begins to spin and sputter out sparks and wriggle its tail for a second or so. And then darts fall straight up the chaussee? A gun stand in its way, between the wheels of which the shell in the head of the rocket burst. The gunners fall right and left. Our rocketeers kept shooting off rockets, none of which ever followed the course of the first. Most of them, on arriving about the middle of the ascent, took a vertical direction, while some actually turned back upon themselves. And one of these, following me like a squib until its shell exploded, actually put me in more danger than all the fire of the enemy throughout that day. And it's just early days of trying to figure out explosives. Because I imagine when like people like military generals and kings and leaders got wind of explosive weaponry, it must have been like rubbing their knees and like, oh, it's gonna be so good, we're gonna really change the world with this one. And then they just got handed the weapon and said, but okay, so how do you use it? Because like, speaking of like World War II, I mentioned like bat bombs earlier. The reason they never went anywhere is because they just kept flying and attacking people. Now, for example, there was a general who really, really hated bats, and his car got destroyed during a demonstration of how they worked. They just flew and attacked his car, just away.
Yeah, and then they had the problem too, because they were actually really effective on the little test towns. They did it, but they had the problem of the bats flying elsewhere and just destroying, like you say, other things around.
The real problem is that when they strap like the bombs to them, because people think like, did they just like put a little bomb on a bat? That's exactly what they did. They put a little bit of adhesive on the bat. The first time they tried, they put too much weight on the bat because they never thought to test how much they can carry. And the first test they did, just all the bats fell and exploded. And at that point, just drop the bomb, right?
Yeah, that's great.
It's really bad because as well, they store them in ice cube trays, like giant ice cube trays, and freeze the bats so they go into hibernation. And while they were hibernating, strap little explosives to them or like stick bombs to them and then unthaw them. The problem was when you unthawed them, the first thing they do is completely flip their shit and just fly everywhere inside the container and then start detonating. It's like, I would not want to be the guy who's in charge of those bats. It just sounds like a bad idea, right?
It's hilarious because it's also a little bit like the pigeon guided missiles, where they were actually like pretty good. Like before they had good guidance system, where they would train the pigeon to peck the little buttons in the missile to go to target, and they worked really well. But of course, it's just a silly invention.
It did work. They had like chicken landmines as well. They had these landmines that were put underground, but they were like too sensitive. If they got cold, they'd stop working. So they thought, we'll put a chicken in there for because the chicken will survive for a couple of days, and that'll keep the thing like working for as long as we need it. And then eventually the chicken will die and it will become inert. We dig it back up.
Yeah, they had some of those that were actually nuclear. So you have these nuclear mines, but with a chicken inside.
Just trust the chicken. It's like, I forget where it is in the world, but they use like a clam, and they just like hot glue a spring to the clam, and if the clam detects that the water quality has gone down, it can turn off all the water to that city. And they ask like experts, like, well, can you not think of a better solution than a clam? It's like, no, because the clam's better at it than we are. It's just we trust this clam to tell us if our water supply has been like tampered with or not.
So going back to fast forwarding a few decades after this, among the numerous others throughout the world attempting rocket mail in the early mid 20th century, arguably the most successful of all attempts at establishing it occurred independently in Austria and India. In the former one Friedrich Schmeidel launched a series of rockets containing mail from one town to another, including one route spanning about 6 kilometers from St. Radigan to Cumberg. This is succinctly described in a 1934 issue of Popular Mechanics.
Each rocket carries 200 to 300 letters from the starting point. The Schocket to Radegund or Cumberg in the neighbourhood of Graz, whence the mail is forwarded by regular postal service. So I like the idea as well, after all this, they've still got to get a regular dude to deliver it. All of the mail rockets have functioned perfectly, each flight being made according to the scheduled plans without loss of a single letter, which is impressive, like not losing a single letter, bearing special rocket mail stamps. The letters are sealed in a metal container to prevent damage, but this precaution has been unnecessary due to the accuracy with which the rockets have arrived at the destination. And that's the thing people probably think when they hear about rocket mail. It's like they think of a rocket flying through their front door, like one of those like Amazon delivery drones they tried for a bit, but people kept throwing rocks at them to steal the packages. So no, they just land in an area and then regular mail workers go and collect them and sort them as normal.
On that drone thing, there's a company, I can't remember what country now, that actually does it. They'll deliver Walmart packages, and it's pretty cool how they do it. Like, it's a pretty nice system. They keep the drone up super high so it stays quiet, and they made it really quiet, and it just drops the thing down. And then they have a little robot that goes, drops it, and then it picks back up the robot, and then they take it back, and they can just go back and forth. But it is in operation now.
Yeah, they have them in China, right? The drone delivery, my friend lives out there, and he tells me like sometimes he just orders stuff via it. And it'll be the point where he just sat in a bar, and he'll just order, and it just flies over to the bar, comes down and grabs it. It's like, that's the future.
That's awesome. That's cool.
Like, you couldn't do that in the UK.
But anyway, so unfortunately, for Schmeidel, his rocket technology was again super accurate, which for the day was pretty revolutionary how accurate he made them. But the Austrian post office killed funding, and then right after that, World War II began, and you might think this guy is positioned to do pretty amazing things, but he did not want his work used for military use, and so he destroyed it all, burned all his notes, everything for his designs and everything, and refused to work on stuff. And even after the war, the U.S. approached him and tried to get him to come work on their rocket program, and he refused because he did not want any of his work to be weaponized, and he knew it would be, so he did not want to work on it. So
because all I picture when it's this is just every time like there's something new gets designed, like Boston Dynamics, right, where they've got like that dog that all they do is like in videos try and kick it over, and everyone's like, okay, at what point are they going to put a gun on it? It's like, we're not going to put a gun on our robot. It's like, you're going to put a gun on your robot. Some guy in the government's going to hand you a fat check and you're going to put a gun on it. I can tell.
Well, they did have the Soviets used dogs for this purpose, where they would do the tank busters. Yeah,
and that is a story of which there is a lot of misinformation. So like people probably know about the Soviet anti-tank dogs, that they trained the dogs using their own tanks, and then when battles started, the dogs would run. So the idea was train a dog to run and hide under a tank, strap a little backpack to the dog with a bomb inside, hides under a tank, blows up. And a lot of the way it's often framed online is that the Soviets were stupid for training dogs on their own tanks. The thing is, dogs don't know the difference between what tanks are. They see no difference between the giant rumbling like metal rhombus going about the battlefield. What the Soviets didn't realize is that they used diesel and the Germans didn't. So when the dogs were trained to detect the tanks by scent, and that was the mistake they made. Whenever I see that story online, it's like, oh, the Soviets trained with their own tanks. Isn't that stupid? It's like, dogs don't know what tanks are. Dogs don't know the difference between tanks. They just know it's a giant metal object. Almost worked until the dogs just ran under their own tanks and also got scared on the battlefield and ran back to their handlers. Like I've got the script up here, and just the fact that they as well practice on stationary tanks. They never accustom the dogs to the sound of a tank in movement, which is obviously very loud. There's a lot of noise, like gunfire and stuff. So a lot of the dogs, when they were deployed on the battlefield, just immediately literally turned tail, ran back to their owners.
That's great. Serves them right for sending the dogs off to get exploded. But going over to India, going back to the rocket mail,
Yes.
former dentist, but then secretary of the Indian Airmail Society, Stephen Smith, from 1934 to 1944, shot off about 80 rockets containing mail and countless other experimental ones. On top of letters, he also in one instance shot a rocket containing food supplies to help earthquake survivors. In addition to that, on June 29th, 1935, he successfully shot a rocket containing 2 live chickens that he named Adam and Eve across the Damodar River.
I always
they survived
found
the ordeal.
when it's a chickens can't fly. Do you feel bad for the chicken that it's basically been stunted on? Like, you can't fly. Biology says you can't fly. Check this out. Or do you like it for the chicken that it gets to experience flight for the first time?
Yeah, real flight instead of this little. They can do like quick. They can hop for a bit and
It's like
get a little
13,
bit of air.
14 seconds, I think, is the record for a chicken
But
in
yeah,
flight.
I think. But this, I didn't do a deep dive, so I could be wrong. But I did a quick search, and I think this technically makes them the first living things shot in a rocket, right? Like
Potentially, if
nothing
it was
before
this early.
1935. Yeah. It would have been and to survive the ordeal, other than like microbes and stuff, I guess. But a chicken. But these chickens actually were kind of famous afterwards for this, and they spent the rest of their life apparently in a zoo. So worked out for them.
I just imagine though if it
whatever.
landed wrong and it just lands, and all I can picture in my head is like a perfect comedy shot of smoke clears and it's just 2 perfect rotisserie chickens, and it's like, oh god. So just fill it in, put the chickens inside some seasoning. Instead of fuel, we put a bit of hot sauce in there and it explodes. Just the fully prepared chicken comes out like a video game.
Yeah, no, totally. That's great. So going back across the pond to the U.S.,
Yes.
And there are several instances of rocket enthusiasts using various rocket-powered aircraft to send letters, including on February 23rd, 1936, when rockets were used to shoot a bundle of letters from Greenwood Lake, New York, to Hewitt, New Jersey, over a then-frozen lake. While the rockets ultimately crashed after a flight of only about a half a mile, their payload was successfully collected by a Hewitt postal worker and taken to the post office for further processing. So this all brings us back to June the 8th, 1959, and the U.S. Postal Service jumping on the rocket mail delivery bandwagon, but in a massively more advanced way than had ever been tried before.
It's
a
good idea when you think about it. Right? On paper, it's a good idea. It's faster, and that's one.
Well, and you can see also for military use, you can see why they might be interested in that, because if they can shoot a rocket with some sort of message that they don't want over lines, any line, no phone or
with some chicken inside
these sorts of things.
As well. Some delicious chicken.
Yeah, they can send these secret messages in a very secure way, and no one's going to necessarily intercept. You might intercept to destroy the missile, but which we had one. I don't know if you did this one or Gilles did this one, of how the British would. So there's rockets coming from launched from during World War II at Britain, and what they would do to disable them is they would just fly their plane alongside it, and then they would just
with the wing
nudge it, kept hitting it, so with their wings. So that was kind of a cool, but there's not really a way to intercept. Not really a way to intercept. Well, that reminds me too of like World War I, when the British how they got around the U-boats was they just hit it with a hammer.
Right? And you think, well, that's stupid. It's not stupid if it works. And if it costs...
It was.
All it was cost of like one lump hammer, whack that periscope
they would get blacksmiths.
You've just blinded.
Yeah, they would get blacksmiths who are great with their hammers and just see the periscope and just hit it with
hit it really hard. You've just crippled like an enemy ship for the cost of one hammer and a dude with a pretty strong forearm. And I love that. When something so expensive is done by something so simple. Right, it's like facial recognition technology is undone by like juggalo makeup. I love all these stories, or like self-driving cars. You can just draw a line in salt. Oh, did you see the one recently? It was like a Tesla was convinced to drive into like a Wile E. Coyote painted wall. It's like all these millions of dollars of like research have gone in. It's like you can fool it with something that fooled like Wile E. Coyote.
Yeah, but when going back to the missile, it would be hard to intercept. You couldn't really intercept. At best, you could probably destroy it. But otherwise, it's getting to its target if it's well targeted. And you get these secret messages.
With some delicious chicken inside.
Super fast, which is great for military because they need that information sometimes. So although purported to be an altruistic endeavor designed to test the feasibility of sending mail via missile, with the Postmaster General himself, Arthur E. Summerfield, at the time waxing poetic about the potential the idea had, the military had another idea where it was just a huge flex aimed at the Soviets to say, this is a very public thing we're doing, and we're going to shoot this mail so accurately, like from these missiles that normally have nukes on them. So we're going to be able to hit a target, and with this mail. So it was a great publicity stunt for them. And towards this end, the missile chosen was the Regulus 1, a cruise missile ordinary tipped with a nuclear warhead that in this case had been replaced by 2 mail containers that had been hand-loaded with the help of Summerfield himself. And after this, he headed off to the missile destination point.
It's so ridiculous. It's so wasteful. But again, you kind of have to respect that much money just to just show your opponent what's up. So I think it's an interview with some military general or someone high up in the military. So during World War II, they had ice cream ships. You must have heard about the ice cream ships, right? Of ships that literally just had ice cream and other sweet treats on them. It's that seems a bit wasteful, right? So one is important for morale. Morale is good. Armies march on their stomach, as Napoleon would say, I think. But also just the level of just the way it just demolished your opponent's morale when they saw you had a battleship that did nothing but make ice cream.
Well, and they also even the normal ships. I went to the to Quincy, Massachusetts. They have the USS Salem there, and I did a tour. I got a private tour because they were sponsoring a thing we were doing. It was super cool. Just go all over the ship and see all the stuff. And one of the things, they had this giant section that was just a big old ice cream parlor. And it was exactly as you might imagine going into an ice cream parlor. It was just that size. So you have this ship where everything's cramped and you're ducking to not hear it. And then there's just this giant wide open area with a big old ice cream parlor for everyone to come gather and have ice cream.
It's so critical for morale, and also just to make your opponent just immediately want to give up. Because it's when you're scraping by to get resources together and your opponents have got a ship that just has ice cream on it and they can afford to waste resources, or even appear to waste their resources or something like that.
Another one with the Soviets had what was that movie, whatever, there was that famous movie on, everyone's gonna kill me on the comments because it's a super famous movie, but on the Great Depression, where the poorest of the Americans were all traveling to California and stuff, everybody's looking for work, but they had cars. In the Soviet Union, to get a car was a big deal and a whole waiting list thing. But these poor Americans who've lost everything have their car and they're driving. It's well, they have a car?
Yeah. There's a famous story told about it. I believe Stephen Fry. He's recounting the story of a school teacher from the Soviet Union. Their mother came over and he took us to a grocery store, and his mother broke down in tears and started beating her fist on the ground. They lied to us. And he's what do you mean? It's you're a school teacher and look at where you buy your groceries. Look at the choice you have as a lowly school teacher. And he never thought of it that way. Of just, the stuff that you take for granted, right? You think about Americans, you can go into any gas station and just get a giant drink full of ice. And ice back in the day was one of those things that it was impossible to get, right? That's why, is it sweet tea? That's why sweet tea was seen as a thing that rich people drank. So it had the three of the most difficult things to obtain, ice, tea, and sugar. And now you can just get one at a gas station for 99 cents.
So being transported on the rocket were about 3,000 copies of a letter written by Summerfield addressed to everyone from postmasters of allied nations to President Dwight D. Eisenhower. So they definitely wanted to get this. This was a big old publicity stunt. In addition, it's noted that everyone aboard the submarine the missile was launched from also got a copy of the letter as a sort of memento. And yes, aboard a submarine, the USS Barbaro submarine, and set to hit a target at the Naval Auxiliary Air Station in Florida, about 200 miles away. And the flight took place shortly after noon on June 8th, 1959. And the missile was a 22-minute flight. That's it for 200 miles. So what is that speed-wise? That's about 545 miles per hour.
Pretty good.
Yeah, it was successful. It touched down and they recovered the payload. And Summerfield was quoted as saying,
"This peacetime employment of a guided missile for the important and practical purpose of carrying mail is the first known official use of missiles by any post office department of any nation. Before man reaches the moon, mail will be delivered within hours from New York to California to Britain to India or Australia by guided missiles." I'm just such a big fan of the idea of just strap it to a missile. It reminds me of it's in South Africa, I believe, where the internet situation down there is pretty dire. And to protest this, some guy just sent a file via pigeon. It's a news thing. He recorded a story on it and sent the file, edited the file and sent it to the news station via a pigeon and via 4 different internet service providers, and the pigeon beat them all. And it's we should just have pigeon internet. It's faster than what you can get for $100 a month.
Can you imagine so Summerfield, it's not really clear whether he was in on the whole whole thing being a publicity stunt or whether he thought this was actually something that was going to go forward. But can you imagine how it was? Because he was talking about like shooting rockets to Britain to send, quick letters and stuff like that. And so you think the U.S. he's talking about sending these rockets to the Allies, across. And the Soviet Union's reaction. They're seeing rockets shooting
Fly
constantly
everywhere,
over to Europe. No, we swear it is mail.
Right? If they start seeing, especially if they're indistinguishable from nuclear tip missiles, right?
Yeah, completely indistinguishable. That's so. Yeah, it would definitely be a horrible idea from that. The Soviets would not react well to, even if it was. So you could start sending a letter. Oh, see, this one's just like all the rest. Oh, nope. Fooled you. Here's a nuke in Moscow or something. But yeah. Despite his lofty claims, Summerfield, it was really the U.S. the military, on the military side at least, they were more in it for the publicity stunt, so that it sort of got shut down not long after. But there was more recently would you pronounce it? Is it X-Corps Aerospace used their Easy Rocket plane to carry some mail for the USPS from Mojave to California City, which is about 180 miles or 290 kilometers. So they did some mail with that. So, and you think Jeff Bezos, he owns a rocket company.
He does.
He owns Amazon. Like, we put two and two together here. Yeah, he even has a product called a Fire Stick.
Isn't it a bit on the nose that, like, if you wrote a dystopian novel where a company bought everything, owned everything, controlled every facet of your life, and its logo was a smirk, you'd think I was you think I was making fun, but it's like, that's what Amazon is, right? Every box, you just get a little box outside your house with a little smirk on it from Amazon.
You always, and the stereotypical in all those like superhero things, the bad guy is always a bald guy.
Yeah.
So
Amazon has funded 2 shows that prove that Lex Luthor was right. I think The Hard Drive, they summed it up with like Invincible and The Boys, where it's just 2 superhero shows that show their Superman-like figure going rogue.
One thing I just put this in here because you had a bonus fact about,
yes.
And I like to do this too. You talked about how, like, whenever you're reading over old newspapers or ads like super old, it's fun just to read the stuff around on the page. And so you put in something from that aforementioned 1934 edition of Popular Mechanics magazine.
Yes.
There was this little sidebar about there was an ad about a guy just sitting at his desk reading a paper while talking to himself, but not talking to himself because, and remember, this is 1934, he was instead talking on a speakerphone, which the article explains.
Telephone conversations can now be conducted without holding a receiver to the ear or speaking directly into a transmitter by employing a recent British invention consisting of a box containing a sensitive microphone and a loudspeaker. The box is placed on a table and the person carrying on a telephone conversation may be seated in an easy chair several feet distant. And I always like seeing, it's so quaint, like I did a video recently, I was editing one, and we mentioned the period in the 90s where the internet was like a newfangled thing, and it was referred to exclusively as the information superhighway. And that was very quaint, and they talked about it in such broad terms. And back in the day, I remember seeing these on like Tomorrow's World in the UK. We had a show that would tell you about things from the future, and it seemed so lofty. And one of the examples I found is like a lady explaining what the internet is and said, imagine in the future you would have a device in your home that contained all the world's knowledge. Any movie, any TV show, any book, any piece of music you wanted to listen to would be instantly accessible on this device. And that must have seemed like the most ridiculous, like, just calling your shot ever. And I was watching that on my phone that has Spotify on it. And like, you got it pretty good. You nailed that. And within 15, 20 years, that was a reality.
Yeah. Well, it is just like where, like when my kids, they want to listen to some music in the car, and it's literally all music is available. Like, even though we're traveling around, it's just available. Whereas when I was like a teen, we would have first mixtapes that you'd have to make and often record from the radio. And so you'd have to time it, you have to wait and then time it perfectly and hope the DJ doesn't keep talking over the beginning to get a good recording and put it right on the right spot of your tape. And then later advanced to CDs where you could rip CDs, or then Napster came along and stuff like that. But it was still, you had these compilations, big old thing of tons of CDs. And yeah, now you can just anything you want.
I'm old enough to remember black and white TV. Like, we had a black and white TV, like just the classic, the hand-me-down TV from a family member who didn't want it. And as a result, one of the reasons I'm scared of water, I mentioned I'm scared of water, is because on that black and white TV, I watched Jaws way too young. And I'll tell you what, Jaws in black and white is terrifying when you're like 7 years old. Yeah. And I'm scared of water as a result, because that just film made me terrified of open water and sharks. Yeah.
I remember there was as well, I had a period there for a while where the ocean was like, no, I'm not going in there, like, for similar reasons.
Like black and white TV.
And I had one of those hand-me-down. It was like a 6-inch screen with a little VCR built in, and that was what I used to watch.
the height
long
of
time, but,
technology back then. It's just even in like media, like a joke I made in my videos a lot is every time we talk about Fast and Furious, which for me is quite a lot because, you know, I'm weird like that. And I always point out in the first Fast and Furious movie, the first thing you see them steal is DVD players attached to TVs.
Yeah.
And it's so funny. And that's one movie series where you can watch it and it's still ongoing. Like the actors are all still in it, or most of them are. And you can go back and watch the first movie in that series and they're stealing DVD players. And there's probably people alive today like, what's a DVD?
Well, and it's the same with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the original, the 1990s one. That was the best one, in my opinion. But all the kids, they were training them to go steal stuff like that as well. Like it was the same thing. I feel like that's probably all contributed to nowadays because technology is so cheap. It seems like when I was a kid, like house break-ins and stuff was just a thing that would happen sometimes, whereas nowadays you never really hear about that. Like it seems like, and I think because what are you gonna do? Is steal even like a giant 70-inch screen where you're gonna just like carry it out of the house or something, and it's not even that particularly valuable to be worth it in the first place. The risk involved.
Not when
so
you can
like
just
you never really hear
snatch a phone out of someone's hands worth like $1,000 or like £1,000.
Yeah, and nobody really carries cash anymore, so you're not like robbing a house and finding a big stash of cash in a drawer or something. So it's just, you know, I feel like maybe I'm just wrong and we should look up the statistics sometime, but it seems like house break-ins is much less of a thing than it used to be.
I think it's just less, it's the word now. There's more valuable things out there, right? Like I said, like someone's personal device, like their phone or their laptop is much more valuable and it can be so much more easily grabbed. Like just snatching a phone out of someone's hand is going to be far more lucrative than waiting until they've gone to sleep and breaking into their house and like getting like their TV. Or their PlayStation, which you know is going to be underneath, and you got to unplug it, and if you don't get all the wires, it's not worth anything.
So,
yes,
moving on from all of that rocket talk, we're going to now go to the dessert, which is the expression, the steely-eyed missile man. So you see that in movies like The Martian and Apollo 13. Someone from NASA will call someone else a steely-eyed missile man, which is in real life, one of the highest compliments one can receive in NASA. If you get branded with that label, it's just like you're one of the best of the best at the place, and you've done something great, basically. So where did the expression come from? It seems like it came from the ballistic missile silos of the Strategic Air Command, sometime in the 1950s and 1960s. But given that was all very top secret nature of that, it's not clear who coined it, but NASA would eventually come to adopt it as well, and this is where it kind of became more publicly known. So within the agency, the term was used very sparingly, referring only to the absolute best and brightest, as noted.
Okay.
Quick aside there.
Okay, I want to know about this. I do love all the various superstitions that NASA has, because I remember writing about this years and years ago now, of just how weirdly superstitious rocket launchers are, and it goes back to like the era of like aviation, and before that, like what do you say, naviation? Is it still aviation if it's a boat? Naval aviation, I guess. Where just there's a lot of superstition around, like, you know, going out into sea with boats and things. And like, for example, we mentioned Yuri Gagarin. Before cosmonauts like go into space, normally they'll try and repeat everything Yuri Gagarin did. Like they'll pee against the wheel arch of the bus that takes them to the place. They'll eat a certain breakfast. They'll go to his office and pay reverence to it. They'll walk along like this this like just series of trees where like cosmonauts plant a tree, and at the end is like Yuri Gagarin's, and this is of course the biggest because it's the oldest. And then in America they have like steak and eggs, because like some astronauts had steak and eggs ages ago. They'll open up peanuts because like some guy in a booth somewhere opened some peanuts at some point, and that became a thing. It's so strange that such smart people, such logic-minded people, are so superstitious. I find that fascinating.
Well, they even do on the peeing one, because like the female astronauts and cosmonauts and stuff, because they have a little more issue like peeing on I think they peed on a tire of the bus or something like that to do that. So they will just take a vial of their pee and throw it on the
for good luck
thing. It's like thing. But going back to the fact that NASA is often credited as having coined this expression, but they actually just popularized it. It's a similar thing. A lot of people think NASA invented Tang and Velcro and the pressurized pen and all these things. But most of the time NASA, I mean, they invented a lot, of course, a lot of advancements. But these things like Tang, Velcro, and the space pen, the so-called space pen, were actually things that already existed. So that one, like the space pen one, people are like, oh, NASA spent $1 billion on this. And it's like, no, they found it. And they actually got a discount because the product was already existed. And the guy just pitched it to them. And they were like, yeah, that's way better than pencils, because pencils, you have graphite floating in little specks of things. So that's one of those frustrations, right? When you
do like what we've done for as long. Like, you'll see the stories. Like you've largely correct.
Yeah.
There's some details there that aren't correct, and they're really, really bad. Like bits of misinformation there. So the story, as David is saying, there is you've probably seen on the internet of like, you know, the NASA spent millions developing a space pen, and then the Russians used pencils. It's like, that's not true. They didn't spend millions developing the space pen. As you said, it was already designed from some guy, and they just bought a bunch off him. And then the Russians didn't use pencils. Nobody uses pencils because the moment like the nib breaks and starts floating around, it gets someone's eye or go into the mechanics. It's a very silly idea, and in fact was a really big issue for them to try and solve, because it's like, how do you write in space?
Yeah. That on that note, do you find, because we've both been doing this forever,
Yes.
like and written thousands of things and everything, and you got to keep your mouth shut a lot. Because nobody likes to be corrected, and you know what. But like when I'm talking to my dad or something, I have no problem just correcting him all. And he's just, at one point, it was last summer, he was just like, you know, you're hard to talk to because you just know everything, and then just you feel like you can't say anything because you're just going to correct. It's like, that's accurate.
I've had that as well. Like friends will just say stuff like, it's really hard to say something to you because you'll have either written an article on it or know about it. It's just, no, it's the nature of what we do. We write stuff for a general audience, so it's just correcting misinformation is a very popular topic of article. It's also interesting to research into history behind stuff like that story about the pen. I believe that for years. I just read it in a book and assumed it was correct. And I find it interesting to find, okay, how correct is it? And I think, you know, it's that thing like setting the record straight, right? Of you don't want the misinformation to be the popular story, but normally the misinformation is a lot more succinct, and history isn't always as succinct as people would like it to be. Which I think we run into a lot, right? You must have had scripts that
there's never nothing's black and white. There's always way more nuance, and anything that seems totally ridiculous, it's like these were often very smart people doing these things. So it's like there's an actual reason why XYZ, like they're not just stupid. So yeah, going back to the steely-eyed missile man. So to describe Jim Lovell recounts it in 1994 memoir Lost Moon. He states,
among the men in the Canaveral blockhouse and the Houston control room, there was no greater tribute a controller could be paid than to describe him in the rough poetry of the rocket community as, and I quote, a steely-eyed missile man. There weren't many steely-eyed missile men in the NASA family. Werner von Braun was certainly one. Chris Kraft was certainly one. Gene Kranz was probably one too. Just, man, it's like,
and they also
such a badass moniker, like a steely-eyed missile man. It's like, what awesome stuff did you do to earn such a badass moniker?
Yeah, they also had the opposite of that. So a different nickname, which NASA flight director Gene Kranz, he recalls regarding colleague John Llewellyn. He states,
John was somewhat on the short-tempered side against those people that you consider to be pogues. Pogues are people that in his mind do not measure up to being steely-eyed missile men. This was particularly noticeable shortly after we moved into the Houston area. We had a bunch of people who were trying to be flight controllers but didn't really have the background for it. I always had to keep John separated from our pogues at the beer parties. And that's something you learn about military. I've written a lot about the military, and something like it's not recently, but I noticed it recently, is there's a big document out there from people in the military of what was your nickname? How did you get that nickname? And whenever you read a book, you can always tell if the person did do any research about the military, if the guy has a badass nickname, because nobody in any military organization or governmental position has a badass nickname. It's always the stupid, like my friend earlier, Bean. Do you think what's your name? Rocket. He's Rocket Man. No, Bean.
Yeah, Top Gun. They had this. This was so we did one on Top Gun a while ago, and so the inaccuracies and stuff. And that was the thing. Everyone has cool names like Maverick and Iceman and these sorts of things. And it's like, no, they will. So there was a quote from one of the pilots from actual Top Gun. He was like, no, they will find whatever the stupidest, most insulting nickname. Like if you do something stupid or whatever, and that's going to be your nickname. Yep. So it's always something like just really insulting. Everybody, that's their call sign and everything. So yeah, nobody gets a cool nickname like that.
Yeah, and I'm trying to find the example. There was one of just some guy was just called Salad because his last name was Caesar. It's stuff like that, right? Oh, there's a story recounted by, I think it's again Stephen Fry, when he met a guy called Heinz. Heinz, 57 varieties, and it's like, why is he called Heinz? Oh, it's just in university they caught him and he had a big bunch of baked beans on his penis. And he was doing stuff with the baked beans, so his nickname was Heinz. And that was just, like I said, my friend Bean, His mum calls him that. Like, I met his parents. His parents use that nickname, and he's been called that. His girlfriend calls him it. It's wild, right? How far these nicknames can go. Yeah. And I get it. My last name's Smallwood.
Yeah, no, you got some funny stuff, like your official company name. I can't believe they let you push that through the Big Wangers.
So my official company name is Big Wangers Incorporated. Not enough, my accountant is that friend Bean. So when they got
nice.
like the application, so I own a company, as most content creators. Like if you own a channel or something, it's good advice to set up a limited company in the UK. So that's where your money goes. So it keeps you safe if you get sued. Like if I say something that someone's unhappy about, they'll sue the company, not me, even though I own the company. And when I was like being given that advice by my accountant, it's like, what can I call it? So normally people just call it after themselves. Could I give it a stupid name? So you could. How stupid do you think? I went, how about Big Wangers Incorporated Limited? And yeah, sure. And I got a letter back from the government, on official government letterhead, a few days later, that just says, congratulations, you've now incorporated the company, Big Wangers Inc. Limited. And I've got a logo that is a stylized penis, like the B, big B. I've got it on t-shirts. I've registered that as a trademark. I've sponsored events. Like my mum occasionally acts as a marshal for rally events. I've had my logo on the back of cars because it's funny. There's a wrestler out there, like an independent wrestler, who reached out to me and asked if he could put his logo on his wrestling attire. So there's a wrestler out there who has Big Wangers Inc. somewhere on his wrestling jersey or whatever, singlet. It's funny, right?
Yeah, it is funny. That's great. But
yes.
Let's see, go back to the Steely-eyed missile man. So while several NASA personnel have received the honor over the years, no single person is more associated with the title of Steely-eyed missile man than Flight Controller John W. Aaron, who he earned this one twice, and one of them you see on Apollo 13, although they use a different character. They don't mention him. But the first one, on November 14th, 1969, at the age of 26, almost single-handedly, he saved an entire Apollo mission from disaster. So as Apollo 12 was NASA's follow-up to the epic-making Apollo 11 mission, which first landed on the moon. So crewed by Commander Pete Conrad, Lunar Module Pilot Alan Bean, and Command Module Pilot Richard Gordon, the mission's primary goals were to make basically just to do everything the Apollo 11 did, but better. So the weather, though, on the afternoon of November the 14th was rainy and overcast with wind speeds up to 152 knots. So that's 280 kilometers per hour, or 173 miles per hour, that the rocket was going to encounter. That's crazy. But that was the highest of any Apollo launch. But Mission Control figured it would be fine. So they start the countdown, and we're going to talk to a little bit about the origin of the countdown and why the Russians do not use it, because it's stupid. It's completely pointless. But in any event, for now,
right?
The rocket. Yeah, the rocket clearing the pad at exactly 4:22, and everything was good. But at T plus 36 seconds, observers on the ground saw a bright flash of light in the sky, followed by another 19 seconds later. And so lightning had struck the rocket, and it actually traveled down the exhaust plume to the ground. And so the issue with this is this caused all sorts of alarms and everything on the panels. The whole panel lights up like a Christmas tree. And back on NASA, they lose all telemetry data. Everything coming back is just garbled. It's just random stuff coming. It doesn't make any sense.
But
so
at least they got an album cover out of it. A rocket mid-launch being struck by lightning. That's an album. I'd buy that album. So Pete Conrad instantly, he wraps his hand around the abort handle. But he waits. He's waiting. The second he pulls that, then they're going to be ejected off, and the whole mission is scrapped. They're just the pilot, the astronauts will be safe, but they'll be ejected off the Saturn V stack and just off to safety, and then the whole mission's scrubbed at that point. So he's holding the abort handle because all these warning, who knows what's happening, and NASA doesn't know what's happening because all their data is garbled. The rocket's still going, nothing. It's not exploded or anything, but he's holding it and he's asking for so what do we do here? So Mission Control, they're scrambling around. They're not sure what's going on. But one man, John Aaron, he's the mission's electrical, environmental, and consumable manager, or ECOM. During a training exercise, he remembers a year before, he had seen something similar with garbled data coming back, and it was just on. And the whole problem was an obscure piece of electrical equipment that they normally don't do anything with, the signal conditioning electronics, and it had been disabled in that training exercise, and he had to figure out that's what was wrong. So the SCE was responsible for converting the raw data from sensors into voltages, and the spacecraft instruments could then read. If it had been deprived of power, however, he felt they would just get this loss of telemetry and this random data. So
he just guessed. He said, flight, try SCE to aux. And then everyone gets quiet and they're like, what? Like, most of the people didn't know. Flight director Gary Griffin didn't know what he was talking about and all this. And even the person talking, Capcom, Gerald Carr, the Capcom, he clarified, and there's like, turn SCE to auxiliary.
That is so like,
confused, but
that's ballsy, right? Of just repeating the same command. Because if you nail that, you're going to be a legend, which evidently this guy was.
Yeah, he is. And this was only the first time. We'll get to the second time he did something super cool. So he nonetheless, Carr, he didn't know what he was talking about because, again, this is sort of an obscure thing that they normally don't have to do. So he relayed it, and the same thing aboard. They were a little confused at first, but then after a little bit, Alan Bean, he remembered what it was and where the switch was. He went, flipped the switch, and everything came back. Like, it was just all working again. So with the SCE now running on auxiliary power now, the telemetry, everything's working, and they go up to space, and then they examine everything, make sure, and there was no significant, nothing worthy of scrubbing the mission at that point, so they continued on. Once they figured that out, and they went on to a successful thing, and so he, of course, got called a steely-eyed missile man
just for being that
quick thinking. And
it's so good. Yeah. Just that, the calling of the shot. Like the Babe Ruth thing, like the pointing to the stands. They're like, no, I'm right. Do this. It's like it seldom pays off, but when it does, those are the stories that, like, they make a legend. They make man into legend.
And with a lightning strike like that, and at this point, they're just not sure what's going on at all. To just think, it could be anything. Like, and just to narrow it down to right there, and then it works. So he would go on to distinguish himself once again, this John Aaron, during the Apollo 13 mission, when he helped solve a crucial electrical problem. So in this one, of course, I think most people know the oxygen tank explosion crippled a bunch of stuff, and they had the battery power issue when they come back in. They didn't have enough, so someone had to come up with the sequence to make that work with the very limited power they had. So Aaron was the one tasked with developing a startup sequence that would allow the crew to run the most vital spacecraft systems without running out of power in the process. And the sequence Aaron eventually came up with called for the spacecraft's communication and telemetry system to be switched on at the last possible moment because they didn't want it to use the power. So they're coming in, and they just switch on the stuff that will actually allow them to come in safely. And so at first, Mission Control was like, no, we're not doing that. You're not at the last possible second when we can't do anything if it doesn't work. It's like we're not doing that.
Yeah. Like there's a couple of people on this flight, and none of their names are Bobby Big Balls. No one has got and if they had steel plate of balls that large, they wouldn't have been on the plane, or they wouldn't have been on the rocket. With the amount of fuel to get them off the ground, there is just something about these guys, right? Like astronauts, they're built different.
So, a lot of them too were like test pilots and stuff before. So yeah, they definitely you're getting on a experimental military plane. That's who knows, but So he insisted this is the only way. It was a sequence to do it, and any other sequence would cause them to run out of battery power too long. So eventually it was accepted, and on April 17th, 1970, the crew of Apollo 13 made a safe landing in the South Pacific. So in the 1995 film, the Apollo 13, it was Ken Mattingly who did all this, but in real life, it was Aaron who came up with the sequence. So he just, for narrative purposes, they made it Ken Mattingly, and he got.
I hate it when they do that with movies.
Pushed to the side,
right? It's like, is it the Titanic movie? They make out the captain to be a huge coward who runs away, and that guy is like a hero in real life, and his hometown has a statue of him looking out into the ocean so he can continue to look out for the people that he lost that day, and his family was still alive when they made Titanic, and James Cameron's like, well, what do you matter? It's a fictional film. It's but it's called Titanic.
Yeah, well, that's a lesser example, though, the movie Moneyball, where both the manager and the head of the scouts are totally going off and against this whole plan and fighting Billy Bean and co. The whole separate way. And in reality, they were all on the same page. They were like, yeah, this is a good plan. And so, and for the manager and stuff, he didn't get to see it until, and the same with the head scout guy, until after they had made the movie. And he's like, I'm the villain. When they agreed to allow themselves to be used in the movie, this was not the thing. And most people, they walk away believing it.
There's so many stories like that. So the Titanic one's one of the roughest, because the dude was legit a hero, and his family were when people Google our granddad, they get the Titanic.
So going back here, some other inductees, just included a couple more stories of steely-eyed missile men, including computer engineer Jack Garman and guidance officer Steve Bales, who, in a similar fashion to John Aaron, saved the Apollo 11 mission from a possible they were going to have to abort it. So during their descent to the lunar surface on July 20th, 1969, astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin began receiving multiple 1201 and 1202 program alarms indicating that the lunar module's guidance computer was becoming overloaded with data. And so no matter what they did, it just kept appearing. And they can't land this. This is potentially a catastrophic thing, and they don't want to mess it up and have our first attempt to land.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, this is the one. This is supposed to be the show. So Mission Control were quite worried about this and whether it would affect even allowed to land. So they might have to abort. So with limited time, Garmin and Bales, they're looking at it, and they know the computer was designed to prioritize certain tasks over the others. So they had to, is it prioritizing the right thing here? Will it do the thing? And they quickly realized that the computer was simply suspending less vital operations to allow more vital ones, like running the landing radar to proceed. Thus, despite all the errors that were happening, it's just like churning out error after error. They were like, no, it's good,
fine.
go.
It's actually fine. Which
yeah,
must,
don't
again,
worry, don't even worry about it.
It's like, I up dead quick in the background. It reminds me of a story of Alan Shepard when he went to space and he was stuck on the landing pad for several hours, and he just told command of man, I gotta pee, and was, we're not cancelling the mission so you can go pee. Is that okay? But can I pee in my suit? And they had to get every single egghead at NASA who wasn't working on the launch. Can he pee in his suit? Well, we guess. So will it short out his life support systems? We don't know. And Alan Shepard must have had the most stressful pee in the history of pee, and he just had to go. He just had to go.
Yeah, or give him a nice jolt if nothing else.
Well, it might short out your life support systems, or it might not. Because you're only meant to be in space
or give you a
20
painful
minutes.
jolt in an area you don't want a painful jolt in. So yeah, they obviously was all successful. They continued to get the alarms, and so as to what was causing the unexpected errors, it was later determined that the computer overflow had been caused by the LEMS rendezvous radar being accidentally left on. But had it not been for their quick thinking and sort of determining what was happening and that it was totally going to be fine, that would have been Apollo 12 that would have been the first to land instead of Apollo 11.
It makes it seem so amateur hour. I know it wasn't, but it's like when you're riding in someone's car, right, and it makes a funny noise. Don't worry, it always makes that noise. When you're in someone's house, right, and there's a loose floorboard, it's it's fine. Don't worry about it.
So a very different computer problem nearly aborted Apollo 14's lunar landing on February the 5th, 1971. Having separated from the Command Service Module Antares, Commander Alan Shepard and Lunar Module pilot Edgar Mitchell were conducting the final checks of their lunar module Kitty Hawk when the computer began returning an abort signal. As no abort command had been given, Mission Control suspected that a small ball of solder had broken loose behind a control panel and shorted the switch. And indeed, when Shepard and Mitchell tapped on the panel with a pen, the signal briefly went away, only to return a moment later. So this might appear to be a minor problem. The problem was that if at any point during the descent, the tiny solder ball, so that it's, the whole thing shaken or whatever, would drift back into the switch, it would trigger an abort, causing the LEMS ascent engine to fire automatically. That would blast, Shepard and Mitchell back into lunar orbit, and the mission is scrapped. So the landing could not proceed until they figured out how to solve it. The problem is that this system, the abort, they didn't want to encode because things could go wrong. They wanted it was hardwired into the system. There was no way to have code bypass it. Yeah. It was a hardwired system.
If you
they'd
press
have to
the button, you want
rewire.
the thing to happen, right? If you press this button to abort, you don't want to risk a computer error. You want the thing that you need to happen as soon as you press the button.
Yeah, so they get all the computer engineers from MIT who would design the LEMS computer, and they called them in. So among them was a 27-year-old Don Eilis, who immediately grasped the difficulty problem. So again, it was hardwired, but so how to get around a hardwired system, and it's not, they can't really take the panel apart, and they didn't have time anyway. This had to be done very quickly, decided because they're orbiting around. So he decided, what if instead what he can do is put some code in that would make the computer think the abort had already been triggered, and if it would already been triggered, the engine wouldn't fire again because it would have presumably, in the way it was all set, it had already fired.
Okay.
So he quickly wrote just a few lines of code that would trick the computer into thinking the abort it was already done, it was already triggered and everything, and so the engine had already fired. then everybody double checked his code because they're having to do this really quickly, and then they transmit it up, they put it in, and from here it worked. They go down, and it just, the computer, as far as the computer was concerned, it had already been fired, so everything was good. They did have to change a few things that I can't remember off the top of my head with the way they did the descent and everything, but otherwise the software patch worked, and they became the 6 men to walk on the moon. So
it's just
that's kind of.
I love these as well. And these really just, like I say, like lateral solutions to problems. Like, it's obviously not as extravagant, but I think too it's the Apple 1 or Apple 3. I wrote an article about it years ago. It's about like an Apple computer had a literal 100% failure rate because Steve Jobs, in his infinite wisdom, was like, well, I want this computer to be silent. It's like, okay, we can make it like, what do you want us to do? Well, what's the thing that makes the most noise? The fan, right? Yeah. Okay, so just take the fan out of the computer, which is obviously not a good idea because the fan is what stops it from overheating. So how do you stop it from overheating? Give it a really big, heavy, like aluminum base, and all the heat will dissipate into that, which will then dissipate into the desk. It didn't work. And what would happen is all the pieces of the computer inside would like expand and then pop out of place. And it was the actual stated solution from Apple when people complained of pick your computer up about 3 inches off the desk and drop it, and all the pieces will fall back into place. And the fact there's like a name for that, like percussive maintenance is the term they use, so it doesn't sound bad. It's like, what does that mean? Whack it. The whole thing like whacking a TV to get it like back into or your car. Just hit it.
Well, it occasionally works, especially when it's like talking about tapping the thing with the space thing where the solder.
That's what it reminded me of. You just hit it, and sometimes there is those like really inelegant solutions that nonetheless work, right?
I had that with my old car. It was a 1988 Tercel, which I had for like 20 years. It was great. So I just the heater worked. I mean, this thing was an old beater. The heater did not work, so I just wired up a system that totally looked like a bomb thing, like it had switches and like a little the whole thing was as janky, and it just looked like a wired bomb, and I literally duct taped it to the dash. But it was a thing. Every now and then, some of the solders or something, I had just not done a good, and the car's vibrating, so every now and then it would just stop, and I'd just hit it. The solder would reconnect, and we're good.
Works fine.
Heater back on.
Yeah, so people can't see, obviously, because like hopefully my visuals look pretty decent, like reasonable enough quality. You can't see behind my soundproofing, which is literally just duct taped to the wall, because no one can see it. So as long as it's duct taped to the wall, it's fine. On my computer desk to get it the right height, so I'm not like leaning down reading like this. Just stacked my monitor on some books because it's got to be at a certain height, and again, no one can see it.
So moving on, we got a few bonus facts. Number one is kind of a funny one. So Shepherd's Prayer, talking about traditions that astronauts have, and this is a prayer that I don't know if they still do it, but for a while was the common thing. So despite seemingly Christian connotations, it's actually just after Alan Shepard, first American in space. So on May the 5th, 1961, as Shepard was waiting to launch on his pioneering Mercury Redstone 3 mission, he uttered the words that would become a sort of mantra for the astronaut corps later. He stated,
"Oh Lord, please don't let me fuck up."
Good. It became a mantra for the astronauts to always say before the missions. And then also on the Mercury Redstone 3, I thought this one was interesting. Do you remember when people used to say A-OK?
Yes.
Like, is that a thing? Was it? Yeah. So this came from the
TV,
Mercury
it's
Redstone.
Like, okie dokie, right? Or all correct is what people say it
Yeah.
comes from.
Yeah. A-OK. But actually it came from this because they figured out that if you said the A before OK, it helped the words cut through all the radio static. So it sort of just, it kicked in things. So it became part of the standard communication protocol for the astronauts was to say A-OK instead of just OK.
Oh, yeah, because the static was a problem, right? 'Cause I think one of the earliest articles I wrote today I found out is about what were the first words like said by Neil Armstrong on the moon. And it's often like misconstrued, like you say, one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. But static ate up the A. So it's like one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Well, and that one's still, I wrote about it. It's still like a controversial one because it's unclear because it is unintelligible and so it's unclear whether if did he flub it, like he knew what he meant to say, but did he actually do it? And so he has a great quote that you put in there where he says, "I just hope that if I messed it up that people will forgive me." It was kind of a
I was kind of worried about other things like mentioned the Titanic earlier. I think I forget the name of the guy, but essentially like he got onto a lifeboat, and this is the time it's like women and children first, and he got onto a lifeboat and he was accused of cowardice, and he was like being like taken to court for this. I'm not sure the exact thing, but he was taken to court and accused of being a coward. And they asked him like, well, why didn't you do X, Y, Z? And his response was, well, we had quite a busy evening, just referring to the sinking of the Titanic. And that was all he needed to say, of like, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you like leap out of the lifeboat and offer it to somebody else? Like, I was focused on my wife. We had quite the evening. And just the idea, like the British understatement, which is a classic thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, that's the classic, like the British, the British. We have some funny ones. It
happened to a guy in the military. Yeah. There was some guy who's like, he radio for support from Americans. And when they asked him what's matter, he go, things were getting a little bit, there's a sticky situation over here, which is British code for, dear God, things are going real bad. But the Americans didn't assume it was that important because it didn't sound that urgent. And they never sent any support.
Yeah, the Monty Python has a great skit with that, with the British military officers just walking around and, like, oh, my leg blew off.
Like, which is a real thing. Yeah. Oh. Robot in the past, like it's Henry Paget. The legendary, like probably the most British sentence ever uttered. It was Lord Henry Paget. His leg got blown off. And when his leg got blown off by a cannonball, his report to have said, dear God, man, my leg has been blown off. To which his like batsman just went, dear God, man, I think you're right. And this is like one of those things where it's possibly apocryphal, but the guy was well known for having just like a very, very like, witty response to almost every situation, including life or death ones. But just like, dear God, man, my leg has gone.
Back then, I know the British military, I remember we did one too on, maybe it was just related to this, but where they were trained, like the officers had to be calm no matter what.
Yes.
So no matter what's happening, they just had to, and they would walk, they wouldn't duck. You don't duck to try to like, you just walk normally. Yeah, exactly. So it was just a thing. They were trained to just be calm and everything all the time.
Yeah, it's kind of about the Queen's Guard as well, right? The Queen's Guard, they're trained to faint, or the King's Guard now, I suppose, are trained to faint to attention. So if you're going to faint, a gentleman won't faint in like an uncouth manner. You stand to attention and you fall flat on your face.
Yeah. So number 2, here another bonus fact: the launch countdown, made by iconic countless movies, TV shows, and all that, is so integral to our collective image of spaceflight that it's difficult to imagine a rocket being launched without one. So it might, as mentioned earlier, be a surprise to learn that the Russians, they do not use countdowns because early Soviet rocket scientists saw little practical need for them. So to this day, Russian rockets are simply launched as soon as the flight controllers determine all is ready, with little build-up or fanfare. So why do the Americans use a countdown? And strangely, the idea came not from an engineer, but rather a filmmaker. In 1929, German director Fritz Lang released Frau im Mond, or Woman in the Moon, a silent science fiction epic about gold prospectors who traveled to the moon. It was one of the most scientifically accurate space films of its day, a result of Lang hiring pioneering astronautical theorists Hermann Oberth as a consultant. To ramp up the tension of the film's showpiece, rocket launch scene, Lang came up with the idea of a countdown, intercutting the scene with little title cards showing numbers gradually counting down to 0. So among the film's biggest fans were Werner von Braun and other young German rocket scientists who, in the 1930s, would be hired by the Nazis to develop the V-2, the world's first operational ballistic missile. So when von Braun and his colleagues were captured and brought to the United States at the end of World War II, or I don't know if captured is the right word, but, they were allowed to come and continue on instead of having trials and stuff. So they brought with them the idea of the countdown, even though it's become a fixture of NASA and everything, but it's not really needed at all. Once it's ready, you don't need, but it's and it's still a thing that to this day, SpaceX does their countdowns. And
the power of movies, never underestimate the power like media can have on somebody, right? Like it's always the thing, like astronauts and stuff, they get told, or like scientists who work on stuff like this. When you ask a lot of them, like, what inspired you to do this? A lot of them say stuff like Star Trek, right? Yeah. Just they saw this like utopian vision of the future and thought, well, I want to do that, and became rocket scientists.
Yeah, and astronauts. And so I know there was one, I think it was either the first black man or black woman in space that they were like, it was Star Trek. Yep. They just saw it and they didn't want to be an astronaut. So, so that is our episode today, conclusion. So, anything else to add? Any thoughts, or all good?
Well, I did like, I've still got that old script I had about like crazy World War II weapons. And what I wanted to mention is exploding rats. Because everyone knows about the exploding bats and the exploding dogs. People forget about the exploding rats. And you might think, is it similar to the dogs, similar to the bats? Did you like strap a little backpack to a little rat and send it into like a German factory? It's like, no, it's way more ingenious. And this is one that cracked me up when I learned about it. And what they do is they'd put some dynamite in a dead rat and sneak into like a coal house in Germany and just leave it by a big pile of coal, and they knew that some like guy shoveling coal in a factory, if he sees a dead rat, he's not going to dispose of the rat properly, is he? He's going to throw it into the furnace and just like, well, it's a rat, throw it into the furnace, who cares? At which point, detonate the rat.
Yeah. Can you imagine, like, during World War II and the Cold War and stuff, at certain agencies, it was just like the government, particularly in the U.S., was just like all the money.
Yeah,
what crazy
money.
Ideas do you have?
Yeah.
You can just have infinite money to try to develop. And some of the funny stuff, you're just sitting around trying to think of stuff.
But it
like,
works.
What if, you're like, hey guys, what if we put dynamite in rats?
Well, it's human nature, right? It's like they'd lay traps for specifically German officers by booby-trapping picture frames in houses that weren't hung straight, because they knew that, like, you know, a regular soldier's not going to do that, but a German officer, when he goes in and, like, you know, makes an office into a building, would straighten up the painting, just like as the sign of a gentleman, and would just detonate and kill themselves. Just human nature. That's what majority of this stuff is, right? So you've just got to predict and anticipate human nature. And if a guy shoveling coal sees a dead rat, he's not going to throw it in the bin. He's going to throw it into the, like, you know, the furnace. And if that rat happens to be full of dynamite, all the better. It's all I can picture in my head. He's just volunteering the rats. I know they didn't, but I just picture, like, which rat wants to die for king and country, and it's like, eat this dynamite.
So good stuff. We will, I guess, wrap it up there today, and we'll be back, I don't know, next time.
I
for
hope
another
to be here.
episode.
Thank you for having me. I've greatly enjoyed going through these scripts, and also just reminiscing about all the random, bizarre, like, things we've covered in the past.
Yeah, that's great. I hope people liked it as well. And you do be sure and subscribe. You can subscribe on the podcast version, the BrainFood Show, if you don't want to watch it on YouTube. So Apple Podcasts and all those. So yeah, go check it out. Links below. Thanks for watching.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day.